Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This video is going to be covering from part 5 of episode 5 up until part 8. This video is going to contain spoilers for the entirety of Umineko though, so if you've not finished the game, I don't recommend you watch. Even if you're not particularly spoiler averse, parts of it won't entirely make sense and won't have context you would need. This video, we're going to get to talk quite a bit more about Erika. In part, one thing that is very funny to me about her character is that Erika is the epitome of, obviously a Mary Sue in One Direction, of being the most perfect and idealized character who slots into a story and simultaneously is a perfect fit that so perfectly does everything that she actively destroys the story by her presence. The first 4 episodes, the solving of the epitaph is always a possibility and a challenge and complex and nebulous, etc. And it does get solved in the third one. But in this one, Erika solving the riddle is almost like a taunting of the riddle of, you're not even that difficult. It's kind of a dumb riddle, to be honest. In the same way that I believe I said last time, Erika is effectively Bern Castell's version of, if I was there, I'd have solved this murder in 5 minutes. I'd have gotten it so easy. It's not even complicated. Which, again, I've not gotten deep enough to start really discussing this, but it is very funny and very intriguing that this mistelling of the tale puts Shannon and Cannon in the same room at the same time. In fact, it seems confusingly contrived, even if Shannon and Cannon didn't share a body. It's oddly contrived to have a moment of literally everybody standing in the same room at the same time when you're talking about an island of 18 people, leaving out Kinzo, because at this point there's not even the illusion of Kinzo actually being alive, there is merely the illusion of Kinzo. But in that sense, it in some ways feels like gathering everyone in one room is so conspicuous and strange that you should almost read it as a clue as being narratively wrong. Because at no point has that ever happened in any previous game, for obvious reasons. But in a way that almost feels like it's a funny background. It's a funny roundabout hint to make you think about, I guess we've never seen everyone in the same room at the same time. I'm kind of curious about how this episode, as it reaches the end, will strongly enough hint that you should not trust it. There is no red truth literally telling you that Shannon and Cannon are physically distinct people standing there, but it is a misapprehension that is so clearly established in a way that feels unequivocal that there must be a very clear indication that it's fake. And one thing I was thinking about was I was curious if it will invoke the same structure as the logic error that will be very crucial, the logic errors that will be very crucial to the next episode. We'll have to see. But the thing that is very funny about Erika is having her be this deeply refined, clearly very strange, very obtuse, very aggressive girl who appears here, who simultaneously invades and ingratiates herself with this family and this story that she is not related to. It's funny that as much as Goda is not especially related to the family or the central drama or like the culprit, the idea that this woman who's literally never once talked to any of these people before would just stumble into this mystery, again, feels very narratively like fake. Which is funny considering that is actually the premise of many running detective series, because you can't constantly be a central part of the mystery that you're wandering into to solve when you're doing a long series and you have to do another and another and another. But this one, again, the fact that this is the 5th episode and we've had 4 episodes of an actual tight central cast, the idea that we've now injected a new character who's just sort of also there sticks out like a sore thumb. Which makes the parts of Erika being charming at dinner very strange. Because it feels like the concept of informed character traits, where the text on its face doesn't really demonstrate the idea of Erika being charming particularly, until characters start saying, wow, she's fitting in with us so well. Characters have to literally outright state that she is fitting, and then question is she being a bit stiff, to which she then cracks a joke that everyone's like, ha ha ha, wow, how perfect. Which, considering the depths of goblinhood she will be descending into over the next 2 episodes, and her status in episode 8 of being like a mini-boss to get climbed on, it's all very good. One aspect to Erika's invasion I want to talk about too is the ways in which she supplants Beatrice as a central character. Beatrice doesn't appear to Maria, instead Erika does. Erika walks up the path. And obviously in part that's supposed to be playing with your expectations, where at this point you're like, oh, and here's Beatrice, and then it's a different person. In fact, a new character that you theoretically couldn't anticipate, but obviously the opening of the episode does set her up. But it also means that a core part of the mystery and motivation of what is happening has been excised, because Beatrice always insists that people should solve the riddle of the epitaph because of how it is relevant to her character, her motivation, her backstory, in a roundabout sense, but it's still key to her tale. The narrative Beatrice is spinning has the epitaph as a core pillar, and she doesn't appear to hint at it. Instead of Beatrice herself introducing the epitaph game, Erika manages to see Beatrice's portrait in the epitaph and deduce the challenge, and therefore induce the game to turn that way. Beatrice is not an active participant of this game, and I do think a component of that is reducing Beatrice to being a figment of Natsuhi's imagination. Beatrice is present as a sprite Natsuhi imagines helping her. Other episodes have shown Beatrice as assisting people, offering help to people, making contracts, being the alchemist, but in a more active role as an agent, whereas this is more her pledging her fealty to Natsuhi in a way that, especially when you look at the actions being taken, both in the quote-unquote objective world, but just even in thinking of the magical narrative and events and the depiction of such, they're just following on from Natsuhi's wishes, and Beatrice herself is just like, oh well, my game gets solved. That's a shame. She doesn't even initiate the game herself, let alone care when it is concluded. We continue to have scenes of Natsuhi being tortured by her situation. One thing that I think is curious is the ways in which Natsuhi here is being given Natsuhi here is being given interiority and backstory, and being shown things that, on the face of it, make you sympathetic to her, especially if you take a sympathetic eye. But given where the episode is going to go, given what kind of storyteller we have narrating events, and what kind of point of view they have, I find it hard to trust that she has her sympathies with Natsuhi, because instead this feels almost like setup for the Natsuhi culprit theory. And this is where this episode begins to feel like someone's fan theory on a forum to explain a mystery. Events are arranged in such a way as to make a deduction make sense, but in a way that is insincere. Lambda Delta, and Bernkastel also, are not particularly sympathetic towards Natsuhi and her plight, but both of them can look at her plight and go, this is the kind of thing that drives a person to murder. In some ways, it's almost the inverse of Battler's disinterest in Beatrice from early on, where Battler was not interested in hearing Beatrice's backstory, neither in the sense that he was not going to be sympathetic to her and he was just going to treat her as an enemy, and he wouldn't even accept that backstory as being a potential clue or insight he could make use of. He's only now come around to actually realizing that would be valuable. Meanwhile, to Bernkastel, to Lambda Delta, these are tools, instruments for building a theory, and not relevant. The feelings, the motivations, they're pieces of evidence, but not a thing you care about. You don't really care why the murderer did a thing. You just need to know, in terms of pure information, to be able to solve the riddle. The fact that Kinzo's beloved hometown is not, strictly speaking, the place he grew up as much as it is a place he has fond memories of, is a good trick for getting the riddle to be difficult for people who don't know him personally. It simultaneously tells you a lot about Kinzo, his upbringing, and ways you could be sympathetic to him, but if all you care about is the riddle, you just need the answer and then you ignore anything it says about Kinzo himself. Even in the sections we've read so far, it's pretty clear that the sympathies are not with Natsuhi, given how Red Truth was used to straight up say, Beatrice isn't there, Natsuhi's imagining it. Which has coloured any other scene of Beatrice and her magical minions that basically feel like a mocking of the idea that Natsuhi is purely having delusions, is in a difficult situation and is going to make desperate moves to escape it. We get to the bit where Battler sees quote-unquote Kinzo, and the fact that Battler's immediate theory is presented as, I didn't see actual Kinzo, I just saw a cloak hanging in the wind, immediately makes me assume that there's something else going on, such as perhaps a person was standing with a cloak, obviously not Kinzo, but someone who was just wearing a cloak that could give the impression of being Kinzo, and possibly someone who did know the epitaph riddle, who could point Battler's attention to the solution that was effectively there and had been solved, but he just hadn't noticed it because it was dark and rainy. I will present an actual theory about specifics of who that could be, though it being Beatrice is a pretty plausible answer. It just then raises the question of what Beatrice is doing in this game. Perhaps just observing someone winning, but the ways the game has been messed up to this point make me curious about how you would rationalize Beatrice's actions and inactions in this game. But aside from that, on the next level up from that, I am not sure what Lambda Delta is doing with this game. I've said, she doesn't understand it and has messed it up, but on the top level, her motivation is to keep Bernkastel trapped, and she seems to be presenting a game that Bernkastel, by playing directly, can just tear right open on its face, but basic premises of the game are flawed. The central mystery is not being addressed. There is not actually a disproof of which is possible if you just do the epitaph and then have a murder and then just go, well, this is just a normal murder. Again, I have not played to the point where we've actually discussed the murders in any particular detail anyway, so I don't know yet how that's going to work. I don't even have a theory or of a culprit, and I'm very, very curious to get to theorizing on that front because this game is just in such a different direction. Then we have a section later where Battler is trying to dissect Beatrice's motivations, which is something he probably should have done sooner, but better late than never. And specifically her motivations with regards the epitaph, which I also find interesting because there's a recurring beat of Beatrice using uncertain methods, using risky methods, which, broadly speaking, in terms of reading Beatrice as a character, I distinctly get the impression it's an ambivalent desire to achieve her goals. It's like a mix of being afraid that her goals will fail, while maybe also being afraid of what would happen were her goals to succeed. Like, if she effectively does manage to come out to Battler, the fact that he would come to realize the situation, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to react well. Especially if she has enacted some amount of a murder game up until that point. Her means of communicating with him frustrates the message, but in part that's because does she want to communicate that message is something she hasn't even fully understood in herself either. She is partly leaving things up to a roulette because the idea that of her own full and complete agency she would just try to tell Battler straight up something is a little bit too scary to address and acknowledge. This, to me, explains a lot of episode 3. If you think about the ways in which Beatrice is play acting, some of those are sincere feelings, and some of those are pure put upon actions. And the line between those two is not clean. Beatrice has intentionally set up ambiguity in order to frustrate someone straightforwardly reading which way her position actually is, because the idea that she could be understood so completely is too much. The idea of someone actually just knowing her is terrifying. Now, that's definitely me projecting somewhat, but that does align with the seemingly inconsistent and irrational actions Beatrice regularly takes. She wants things, but will get in her own way. And you can read this as thinking that she can't possibly want the thing, but it's just as reasonable to read it as her wanting it, but being afraid of it. And it is funny that, once again, Battler gets stuck in a trap here of trying to weigh up the two sides of the scale, thinking entirely in terms of, oh, what worth does the epitaph have to her? When the epitaph is merely a means to an end. Likewise, people have no use for gold. Gold is just a currency. People technically have no use for money either, but that's getting too abstract. But the gold itself is an object that converts into a resource that you use to actually achieve the things you want. Ava's desire is not money. Ava's desire is to either become the successor herself or her child become the successor. Ava's desires have more to do with the emotional realities of things, because at the end of the day, if you actually think about it, it's not even that Ava wants to be the successor as much as Ava wants to be praised for the efforts she's been putting in all her life and not undermined in the way she has been forever. And obviously you can abstract most desires this way in a way that's sometimes counterintuitive or intellectually dishonest. But in this particular case, it does track for how Beatrice is operating in this situation. Beatrice doesn't care about the epitaph because Beatrice cares about the context around it. The epitaph is a means to an end. Gold is just the thing you use to get money, which you want because you then use that to get a different thing you want, which actively improves your life, or ideally would anyway. In the conversation later we get between Kraus and Natsuhi as he's making arrangements to try and take care of his family, even if he gets completely and utterly annihilated by his illegal actions. It's depending again on how you want to read this scene, it is heartwarming that he is sacrificing his marriage to try and do this. He's literally setting them up to be able to be divorced, which obviously Natsuhi would not particularly like, but at the same time, it would be theoretically for her own safety. So Natsuhi might read this one of two ways, once again. But the other way you can also read this is Krauss is planting perfect motive evidence for Natsuhi to be a murderer. Anytime anyone writes a will, sets up any situation like that, if you're in a mystery story, you're really asking for trouble. Because either you're going to get you or someone else killed, or you're going to get yourself or someone else massively suspected as being a culprit in a murder that obviously happens for other reasons. I'll have to cut this episode technically short here, because I am still a little bit baffled by the objective realities of the 19th man, or the man from 19 years ago, and the letter from Beatrice that gets left outside the door. I have to ponder on those, and I think I will ponder on those in conjunction with the murders that have been enacted, because I truly need some time to parse out what Lambda Delta is trying to do and what person would have motive for murders in this situation that's not Natsuhi. Or, as I alluded to earlier, am I supposed to be finding the logic error that completely untangles this as a potential murder mystery? That it is in fact impossible, and only possible by witches? I'll have more to say on that next time, because we will be covering the actual first Twilight then. But until then, thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.